Habari gani, karibuni, asanteni kwa kuwa nasi. That is, what's the news? Welcome and thank you for being with us. That is Ubuntu, otherwise known as Kiswahili. The name is Nduko. I am the host on Kumbukeni. We are here to counter the false narratives told against our people and our continent, our motherland, and also to tell our narrative from our own perspective, the African perspective. I am so happy to be joined today by Dr. Akil Kokayi Khalfani, who I'm looking forward to. This conversation, I think, is much needed in our community, and I hope you all take lessons from it and implement so that we can continue the healing that we've already started. Dr. Khalfani, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. I think that, you have a beautiful spirit and energy, and I appreciate the opportunity. I say also, you say Habargani,
Hey.
and I'm honored to really just kind of have a conversation here and come on. I'm a professor of sociology and African studies. Teach those subjects at Essex County College in New Jersey for the last 20 years. I'm an author of a book called The Hidden Debate and a couple of other things that I've worked on. And I'm an ambassador for the Oni, who is the king of Nigeria. So I'm the Pan African Diaspora Ambassador to the Oni. And I wear, 3 or 4 or 5 other hats that I do, and maybe we'll cover some of those in here. But really, what I want to focus on is that I'm a servant of the masses, and I'm here to talk about the things that I've learned over the years, from an academic perspective, from an experiential perspective, and from a perspective of download that the ancestors and the creator have provided me with to share with others to help us as we transform our communities.
Yes. So today we're going to be talking about recentering the African family. And you all might be hearing that and asking, what do you mean recentering? We are recentering the African family. We are existing in the African family. But no, we are not, which is something that we don't realize. Again, the cognitive dissonance, that we're just going along thinking everything is fine, but it isn't. So I recently was having a conversation with, and it's interesting, Dr. Khalfani, because I'm writing now as I apply for my master's paper. And in it, Dr. Malefi Asante is speaking about centering Afrocentricity, centering our African ways, right? In how we teach, in law, in politics, but here in family, in our social ways. And this is what we're going to be talking about. So as we were speaking, we spoke about the nuclear family and how much it is a Western way of living family and how it feeds into individualism. So please talk about the nuclear family. Let's break it down.
Yeah, so as a sociologist, we spend time talking about family, and I co-authored a introduction to sociology textbook. And in there, we talk about some other things in regards to family. And so one of the things when it looks at and structures the family, it does this comparison, or we do this comparison as sociologists to talk about a dyad and a triad, right? And a dyad is a relationship between 2 individuals, and a triad is in a relationship between 3 or 3 individuals or entities, if you will. And so when we think about the African family, we can talk about that represents, that triad represents the nuclear family, in that it looks at the husband and wife and the children, if you will, right? And so then that becomes the locus of our focus when we think about family. When we talk about family, when we say my family, particularly in this kind of westernized way, we're really talking about the husband and wife and the children, and that's the thrust of what's being talked about. And I think if we go back a little bit and we talk about, when we use the word family in a different way, we talk about family, that family always means the grandparents, always means the aunts and uncles, the nieces and nephews who oftentimes in many places, especially on the continent, are not called nieces and nephews, but are called brothers and sisters, right? And your, someone, your auntie may be referred to as your mother. And so then we get a different understanding because of the necessity of how we think about that. Even when we talk about, and a lot of people use this kind of really as a trope today to talk about the idea of that it takes a village to raise a child or whatever. And I was at a celebration last night, and one of the brothers was mentioning that it takes a village. Brother True, he was saying that it takes a village to raise to sustain a marriage. And when we think about that and we go back to our African foundations, that obviously that's the case, because when the marriage happens, it's not a marriage between individuals, it's a marriage between families. And when we understand the real meaning of that, that even with the couples, sometimes it's difficult to do this in kind of a Western way, but that you have troubles, you need to go talk to either one of the persons can go talk to the parents or the aunts and uncles or the grandparents if they're still around, and not to talk about just the children or whatever, but to talk about challenges in the marriage. And that doesn't always maybe come out in a comfortable way, but that's the resource that we need to rely on, because the family idea is not just about the two individuals. And when we rely on those two individuals, that's one of the reasons why we have breakups. In the advertisement, you posted a picture, an image from uh, something I wrote in a book called The Family Web of Relationships. And in doing so, the reason I crafted that was that I was trying to get students, because this is targeted towards students in Introduction to Sociology. I was trying to get students and people really to see that when we think about family, if we talk about it in a completely different way, then maybe we help to maintain those families. And unfortunately, I don't have my other diagrams here with me today. But what I wanted to say is,
I'll pull up the two.
okay,
I'll see what I can pull them up.
However, the other diagram is really that it's an image where you have, if you imagine a circle, right, and you have dots inside the circle, that each one of those dots represents a family. Yeah, so this is the family web of relationships. And so I'll explain this and I'll come back to the other diagram. So that the dyad exists. The dyad is between the male and the female partner, the husband and the wife. Maybe they're not married yet, but they're still and that's the other part. Even when you're not married in our relationship, you could be together for many years and people will still say that's your wife or that's your husband, even though you're not married in our community. But this dyad is a fragile relationship, and it's only fragile because we don't see it in the context of the family web. And so then the dyad is here, but the triad is also here. So the triad is the child or children and the male and the female partner in a relationship. And so then this triad here, we'll
So
see
sorry, which
that
one
when
do
you
you want
think
me to
about
have
the
up?
other parts of
This is the one you
family
this is
web,
the one you're talking.
that the dyad always exists, as long as there's a relationship between them. And when there's a triad, that kind of forces a relationship between the husband and wife. So if this line here is broken between the husband and the wife, the children themselves are the ones that insist upon the relationship between the parents. And their insistence might be that if they didn't grow up knowing their father or they didn't grow up knowing their mother, that they push the others to make sure that they do know. And so therefore that forces a relationship back where this dyad seems like once it's broken, it's gone. We talk about in sociology that dyad is the weakest relationship because once it is broken, it's gone. But it's only broken once it's gone if you only see it as a relationship solely between the two individuals. Once you put it back in the web, even if it was a dating relationship, that there's always influence, and sometimes negative, but we hope positive influence between the folks in the web. You can go back to the web for a second. So here, that in addition to the children, you have obviously the extended family, and this extended family, this first one, is the parents and the siblings on both sides, whereas the extended family includes family friends. Sometimes in the family, friends are closer than the biological family, and so when we think about all those relationships and bonds, that's what I said here. You have 42 bi-directional relationships when you really think about it in that way, right? Uh, and then when you look at the community is also part of those relationships. The community could be people at your at your work, the people who live across the street. All of these people have impact in the relationship. And if we're all working towards the success of the relationships, then this web creates a tighter bond, right? And if folks are not working towards the success of the relationship, and they're focusing on their individual things or something of that nature, then these bonds become weaker. And then the spiritual community foundation is whether you go to church or mosque or a temple or some other kind of spiritual foundation, that all of those places tie you in together. And I've had a student a couple of times, well, I don't have any spiritual foundation. I say, okay, well, you can remove that circle, but still the other ones exist, right? So those are the links that we have in there. You can take that down. So the other diagram I'm speaking of, though, if you imagine a circle and dots, random dots in the circle, that each one of those dots represents a family unit. However, if the dot is solely or mostly focused on itself, that it leaves room for the outside family, so that circle on the outside is the community in which that family developed. And the family always develops in a community because the community was there first. And if we understand that the community is there first, if we do things to support the community, then the community will put pressure and or assistance back on the family unit, the triad again, or the nuclear family, to help it succeed. However, if we don't put any kind of emphasis on that external portion of the circle, then that's when we leave room for failure, because there's no web to catch you. And the community web is a multiplicity of family webs. And that's how I think we have to look at it and see it and strive to make it work. If we think about the community in that sense, that the community has a responsibility to the family, right? And when you see that the community has a responsibility to the family, that it's no different than when we don't work to strengthen the community and we think about crime, that then the people who rob you or maybe harm you in some kind of way are the people who needed you in some way, maybe not directly, but you specifically directly, but needed you as in the community to help the challenges of the community. And then since they didn't get them, and maybe they're on drugs, or maybe they're just poor, I won't say just poor, but they're poor and they have need for food and resources, and then you become a victim of their impoverishment, right? Because then they come and steal from your car or take your phone or whatever else to try and make ends meet, because they don't have, or they don't see other ways. They haven't created other ways. But if you were helping them to create other ways, if we collectively work towards these things, we would have less violence in our communities. We'd have less theft in our communities. We'd have less children. One, I would say we don't talk about enough, children being abducted, right? In the U.S., we think about it around the world, the number of children, especially young girls, African-American girls, girls of African descent in the United States who are being, who are missing, right? If we look at those numbers, it's appalling. And we collectively have not done enough to work on the challenges that are there causing those girls to be missing. right? So all of these things collectively are what they, reframing, restructuring, returning to the source of our ideas about family are the things that we need to be doing. And we have some great examples of things that we need to do that are outside of what we think the norm is to do so. So, one, for instance, is Baba Fukiao. Baba Fukiao from the Congo wrote a book called Mbongi. And in that book, instead of talking about democracy and capitalism and communism and socialism, he demonstrates that we already had an African way of governance. And so, what are our African ways of family? What are our African ways of doing all the things that we know and think of that we should be able to employ if, in fact, we study and understand ourselves? So we're so reliant on somebody else. Carter G. Woodson wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And in his book, he's really talking about that we go through these institutions now that, I think that was in 1933 or 22 that the book came out. And he's saying that, now that we as people of African descent have access to education, we're going to all of these institutions and we're learning about Greek and Roman and England, this and that, and even business kinds of things. And we're coming back to our community talking about these things, but not necessarily looking at ways to apply them in our own communities. So we're talking about business, or we're talking about, Plato or Aristotle or Socrates or Shakespeare and all these things, and maybe they're all great. However, is the application of what they're talking about as needed in our community as we think it is? And I think that some of it might be because some of it actually came from us. So let's look at it in that way. That's why you had George G.M. James wrote a book called Greek Philosophy, a Stolen African Philosophy. And maybe we don't have to say stolen, but it was that's where they studied. That's how they learned. And so then it's stolen because there's no attribution, right? So maybe in its original intent, it wasn't being stolen, but because of today, that it's presented as if all of the philosophy and ideas that the Greeks and the Romans had, they were all genuinely their own ideas, and that they didn't get anywhere. Well, why were they in Kemet? Why were they in Egypt or Africa, right? You go through all that because some people don't know Kemet, so I want to make sure. And some people, like the Europeans, will say that Egypt's not in Africa, so we got to break it all down to make sure we get it back
Please
to
do.
understand they're in Africa, and the Kemet is the name that was used. But
Please do.
so those things are some of the things we have to think about in terms of who we are and what we bring to the table, and valuing what we bring to the table and have brought to the table, so that what we bring to the table is not new, right? That these things are things that we've been doing, and we have, because of European imposition, we have devalued them.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't exist, it's just that we have less value in them because we think that what somebody else's value, someone else has placed on something, is more valuable than the thing that we already have. And we don't, and I'm not saying that all of our African systems are perfect, right? And so we have to study them, find our flaws, our inconsistency, and find ways to build on the things that are strong, strengthen them up, get rid of the things, or put them to the side to look at them another day, the things that are broken or not working or cause problems. But maybe sometimes we need to figure out why they're causing problems. Are they causing problems because of other kinds of impositions, or were they always flawed, right? So some of those things that we can think of, that we can look at, and we can look at sometimes with new eyes. So I'm not one to say that we want to cast out everything immediately because we have something new, but maybe we just need to give a little time for us to ruminate on it, right? And then we can begin to come to a better understanding of what it is. And then we had a whole group of Africans who were in the Americas, indigenous folks here who have been here for thousands of years. And so we also have some great insights to relationship and spiritual understandings from those brothers and sisters. And we need to marry all those diverse ideas about African being that gives us the ability to do so. And the last thing I'll say on this is that as we do this, we also need to understand and study those who've been our oppressors. So that Europeans, we need to understand how they think. And a great book on that is by Maremba Ani. It's called Yorugu. And it's a book that looks at it's an African-centered analysis of European epistemology and ontology, European ways of thinking and being. We need to understand how those who've thought it in their best interest to oppress other folks, whether they were oppressing Africans here in the Americas, on the continent, or Chinese people. You know, I was listening to a video earlier today, and it was talking about how that the British, that they came to China and began to unravel that society because the Chinese wouldn't let them in. And so then they concocted some story about that. And then they began wars with them using the opium that they got that they themselves were forcing the Indians to raise, and then they took that to China to devalue and shrink the Chinese economy and their systems of life and governance. So these kinds of things have been going on, and we need to understand that that's part of their way that they see that they should be, and that their being is unbeing other folks. So those are some of the things I think that we have to factor into this idea of what family is and what it can be. And I've been married for at the end of June, it'll be 18 months. So it's not marriage is not easy. And I think that we need to find ways to strengthen our relationships. And today we have psychologists who can be tools of maintaining relationships. We have other kind of counseling services. We have brothers and sisters who have groups that do that. There's Monwasha. There's a brother and sister out of Trenton, New Jersey. Monshu and Nawasha. They have a group, and they do classes and work for folks to help them bring it into being, to understand the relationships. And so all of those things we have to employ to make sure we do so. And I think we also need to read about different things. Like there's Ubuntu Some's book. She has a book on relationships. That's Melodoma Some's ex-wife. And they have some things from the Bambara tradition in Burkina Faso. And so then there's lots of tools out there, and we have to look to employ those tools to do so. And then that gives us pause, and I think that's a good thing. It gives us pause to be able to do those kinds of things. And one of the things that I think is important that I learned this when I was in China. I knew this, but learned it in a different way. And that is that we've got to give each other grace, right? I think that was the best
thing. That was the best thing you said to me. And yes, go on, talk about it. That was the best lesson you left with me. Yes.
So for me, that lesson is that, in China, I was in Chengdu, and Chengdu is a city of, I think it's like 23 million. It's like, it's said to be a medium size, but it's massive in terms of its population and density. However, just the way that they moved sometimes, whether it was cars or bikes, that they gave. When somebody would cut somebody off, at least what I saw, I was there for 5 weeks, that people would give each other grace. And that grace I think is, and I'm not saying it happens everywhere, but it was just an idea. Maybe they have a whole bunch of other problems. So I'm not saying that it's not doesn't have some problems, but that one thing enlightened me about life itself, right?
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
is that in general, we need to give each other grace. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles part of the time, and if somebody stepped on your shoe, that was reason to fight. When in fact, we should just give grace, right?
Mm.
Uh, Yo, man, when you stepped on my shoe, oh, I'm sorry, bro, I appreciate it. And then you go on about your way. It's no need to fight or cut somebody because they stepped on your shoe. The shoe is a shoe. It's not.
Mhm.
They didn't intentionally try to harm you. I mean, if they stepped on your shoe and they were trying to make a point, that's a different story. It still doesn't mean you have to go to blows about it, but that's a different kind of thing as opposed to somebody doing something accidentally. And so then giving each other grace in our relationships means that sometimes we have to pause on the things that we want to say, or hope that the other person pauses so that we can navigate the spaces differently. And
Mhm.
even with our children, I have 4 children. I think that sometimes we have to do the same things. And maybe I'm a little hard sometimes, and I but I think that I strive to give some grace, even though I may not give as much as they think I need to give.
Mhm.
I'm sure some of them are listening now, but so I think that striving to be successful in those processes and spaces is important, and we can, we have to come up with some strategies that are maybe not currently in our lexicon, right?
Mhm.
Not
Mhm.
currently in our ways and pathways, because Europeans tried to eradicate much of who and what we are, our ways of doing, being, and thinking. That they tried to impose that their ideas on that because they suggested that ours were bankrupt. When I think that what they were suggesting was that they didn't understand them and they didn't know how to use them, and so therefore they wanted us to be like them because it was more familiar to them, knowing that
Mm.
what they did to a great extent was problematic, right? So they recognize they came from what they say is the Dark Ages, right? And if you think about that, the Dark Ages only happened after the period of enlightenment that was brought there by the Moors. The
Yeah.
Moors brought enlightenment to Europe, right? To Spain, Portugal, maybe part of France and southern Italy. That the Moors brought in running water. They brought in these were Africans who were Muslims. Uh,
Mhm.
they brought in running water. They brought in libraries and schools and street lights. They had all of
Math.
these different
Mhm.
things that they brought in. And when I was in Portugal last year or the year before, they even have in one of their things they had a sewage system. They still have the pipes that the Africans had put there all the way back when and so the Moors were in Europe for 700 to 800 years ruling, and so then that after that though is when they start talking about the Dark Ages, and then the Renaissance happened after that. Well, the Renaissance was their second Renaissance.
Mhm. 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 So, Dr. Kalfani, not to detour from the topic, because we have been so conditioned in this lineal way of being that is Western that we don't understand that even when it seems like we're detouring, what we're talking about has to do with what we were talking about. You mentioned just now the Moors. What is the importance of us learning about the Moors? What's the importance of you teaching about the Moors and what they did to us as a community as we
Mhm.
continue to heal?
Well, I think that the Moors, we actually focus on the presence of the Moors in Spain, but what we have to realize is that the Moors brought to Spain, right? There's a book by Stanley Lane Poole that talks about, if anybody wants to learn more about it, Stanley Lane Poole, The Moors of Spain, and um, a brother who was a professor at Rutgers in New Brunswick. I remember his name in a second. He
Mm.
wrote They Came Before Columbus. He also wrote another book about the Moors. And so, but my point is that the Moors, um, I think we're missing an important part about the Moors, and you asking this made me think about it. Is that the Moors were already doing what they did? They didn't come and just all of a sudden say, "Aha, let me bring running water. Aha, let
Mm-hmm.
me teach them about bathing. Aha,
Mm-hmm.
let me create a university." No,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that they had already been doing for thousands of years,
Mm-hmm.
and so then they brought the science and technology and ethics that they already had to Europe,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that that's one of the lessons is that many of the things that we see that African people do and that we see what the Moors took there, we actually have to look back, and maybe this is another great study for somebody to do, is who were the Moors before they came to Spain,
Mm-hmm.
right? I haven't seen that book. It might be in Arabic though, so that might be a thing to think about. And it might be in an Africanized, or some books are written using Arabic script, but it's actually an African language. It's like looking at um, uh, uh, using um, I guess English or European the the alphabet
Mm-hmm.
to write in Swahili. So they're using
Yeah.
so Swahili. There's not a Swahili script, but they're using that. So the same is true about Arabic letters, characters, and that they're used to craft African and other languages. So
Mm-hmm.
there may be some of that. So if we go back to Timbuktu, we go back to all those libraries that are in the Sahel. Some of them are still there. A friend of mine, his name is Tukufu Zuberi, had written a book. I don't think it ever got published, but he wrote a book on Timbuktu.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, one of the things that was most fascinating to me was that he talked about the living books. And so then you can imagine that some of those living books carried themselves to Europe, right? So those living books were books that so I write in it, and that's so a 300-page book, and then my son writes in it, and he
Mm-hmm.
continues it, the same book, and then my grandson writes in it and continues it, the
Mm-hmm.
same book. And so then maybe there you have multiple volumes of this one book, but it's generations looking at, talking about, telling the stories. And so those kinds of concepts are what the Moors brought to Spain, and we've got to look and see that Spain and Portugal and all these other places, that the essence of an African way of doing and thinking existed to positively affect those places, and where else has it touched and positively affected. And so if other people are picking up parts and pieces of what we've done and making it their own, and calling it their own, and calling it theirs, and removing the us from it, we have to look to find out, and maybe the Moors is a great place. Look at some of the things that the Spanish and the Portuguese are doing, some of their systems, ways of thinking, the ones that are not enslaving and corrupt, that then we can look at and say, well, where did they get this from? And if they did this something that came from the Moors, then we need to think about what is it that the Moors actually what came with those Africans as they traveled in different places and spaces around the globe. And I think those are some of the lessons that we learn, is that we have had and do have um, insights that have and ways of doing and thinking that have impacted the world, and at some people move towards them and we move away from them because we've been told that they're backwards ways of thinking and doing, even with spirituality, right? So that everybody uses a good example really is that, not before I even get to spirituality, is just the idea of it takes a village to raise a child. That concept, everybody uses that now, but sometimes they attribute it to Africa and sometimes they don't, right? And so then that idea, that there's probably other ideas like it that we need to think about, and then that will help us to begin to look internally to ourselves at the gifts that we've given to the world, and then we can associate ourselves. I like that word, to reassociate ourselves with the essence of what we've contributed to the world over the years. then we can begin to do and think about things differently, because we have an understanding of what we've always been contributing, and people can see that for what it is.
Thank you, Dr. Khalfani. So let's talk a little bit more about the nuclear family and individualism, right? And how it represents individualism and what the harm. So the goal, again, in Kumbukeni is for us to learn the lessons so that we can implement them, so that we can start healing our community. We had a guest recently who we were telling that Africa is in shambles, like we as a community are in shambles, and they're like, are we? So some of us don't even realize that we are not operating in a healthy way, a way that is conducive to the well-being of the community and ourselves. Our families are breaking up, divorce rates are high, successful marriages are fewer, respectful children are no longer the norm, right? It's the rare occasion you go, oh, your child is so respectful, everyone is so, right, surprised.
Right.
So people are black on black crime, right? Killing each other on the streets, not valuing each other's life. So how does that individualism in the nuclear family contribute to all that harm? And speak more about the nuclear family and how it promotes individualism.
Yeah. So the other aspects of that, I think, well, one is that when you think about the nuclear family, that you're strengthening your own, maybe you have one child, maybe you have two, most people now don't have 9, 10 children. My mother's family, there's 10. My mother is one of 10. So that size, you can't even afford that for the most part, that size of family now.
No.
Where,
Can you
because
imagine
also in
childcare
the
with
past,
10 children?
a family that size would be helping to bring resources into the family. So it would be a very different kind of thing also, especially if they were living in a rural space. So the other piece of it about the individualism that I think is that seems like a benefit is that you can, maybe stack away money. You can have the super nice house and cars and go on vacations, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do those things, right? However, I want to put them in the context that if that becomes your primary focus, then you create a system of that victimhood that I was talking about, right? Because you haven't invested or reinvested in the surrounding areas. We go out and you ask people if they walk out into their own neighborhoods, do they know their neighbors, right? How many people can tell me the names? And I'm a victim of this too. I can't tell you the names of. Now back in the day, we used to tell you the name of everybody on the block. Everybody knew the entire street. We knew almost everybody on the block, right? And today, this kind of individualism, go home, especially if you live in the suburbs, you go in, you drive your car, you put it in the garage, you never even see people, and so then creating a different reality where people are seeing people and engaging with people, then that creates a different kind of reality. And so then that level of just financially even taking care of your own, right? And maybe you do a little bit of donation here and there for other things, but those things are that community essence is not your primary responsibility. And I get sometimes pushback. I'll say that in families, when even before I got married, this is my second marriage. Before I got remarried, that I said that family is first. I mean, community is first before the idea of family. And so I know that can, especially with some of our sisters, that could be problematic, because I'm saying that I'm not placing you first or the family, our immediate family first. I'm placing our community first. And however, the reasons I'm doing that is so that the community protects the family along with my efforts to protect the family.
But also there would not be a you too without the community, because you had people who raised you, Khalfani,
Right.
and you had people who raised the sister that decides to be with you, and they contributed to this the adults that you now are and what you're going to bring in.
Exactly.
And you're right. It's so interesting because I operate in both spaces, right? I have experienced that communal way of being. Thankfully, it's still there in some parts back at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I've experienced this individualistic. And my reaction to the individualistic nuclear family way of being has been, and because I had experienced the communal, I've been fighting against it, right? So here I am, and I didn't even think about it until we had the conversation which we had a couple of days ago. So I have been in a situation where I'm like, I can't believe my family is doing this, the ones that are here in America, right? Why are not back at home? We did this and this and this. Why are they like this, right? Where you're not helping your family anymore, where you're not concerned if your family is doing bad anymore. You're not worried about how your and now we're talking about blood family, your cousin, your uncle, your sisters are doing, because you're so focused on, I'm taking care of me and my children. So that, and we don't see it as individualistic. You're right. We see it as success. We see it as like, because that's what Western culture is selling to us. You need to build wealth for yourself. You need to retain, right? The stocks, the savings accounts, the investments, wealth for yourself. In the meantime, everything around you is breaking apart and you don't even see that you're a part of making it break apart.
Yeah. Also, I think that the piece about resources is important, right? So that the as we're striving to do all of these things, that we think that we can amass more resources, and sometimes people do, and our the imposition of this kind of capitalistic individualistic idea is the modus operandi that sets that in place, right? It creates this idea that that is success. And I mentioned to you about, in regards to success, I mentioned to you about Derek Bell, right? And Derek Bell, he was he's a great scholar, legal scholar, who was one of the people who was developed the idea of critical race theory, and just a bunch of other stuff he did as a legal scholar. But in a book he wrote called Ethical Ambitions, he raised the question in the very beginning of the book. He says, "How do I maintain my integrity while seeking success? How do I maintain my integrity while seeking success?" And well, he says that the first thing you got is you got to have passion. What's your drive? Why do you get up every morning, right? What are the motivating forces that compel you to do anything, let alone all the things that we need to work on? And I want to detour for 1 second, because if we can put a pin in this thought, because I forgot to say this before, and that is that the other thing that people are trying to do is survive, right? So you're forced in a position of survival, and
Yes.
so survival becomes the nuclear family model is seen as a successful model in survival sometimes, because then those other family components sometimes are impediments to survival, or their necessity is only in survival as opposed to something else. So I want to put a peg in that because I've forgotten to say it, and then go back to Bell. So in Bell, thinking about how do I maintain my integrity while seeking success, that piece of he's talking about for us to have passion. I think I see a lot of passion, um, and I hope people don't take this wrong, but I see a void in passion in a lot of our young folks. They don't, like we grew up with drive, um, you know, hustling to do this and that and the other. Um, and sometimes now young folks have to be pushed to do almost anything. And so when you have to be pushed real hard to do the basics, I see that, and I see that I've seen that on the continent. I've seen that other places I've gone. That this idea about drive to me is disconcerting, and I think that we need to figure out how to change the narrative about drive. So that gets back to passion. You ask them what they want to do. I don't know. I mean, it's okay to not be clear, but you've got to have something, and something other than money, right? Because that's the other thing that this capitalist system does, is it makes everything that you do be about money, right? And my father used to always say that whatever you're gonna do, be excellent at it. I said, I don't care if you're gonna be a trash picker, picking up trash. They'll just be excellent at it. And I agree with that idea, that that I don't have to wait for somebody on my block. If I see trash, yeah, I got a lot of degrees and this, that, and the other, but I go pick up the trash on the block, all the way up and down the block sometimes, because nobody else is doing it. Or if I see somebody throwing trash, I'm like, yo, brother, this is my neighborhood. You can't throw trash here. Pick that mess up and put it somewhere in a can or something. Because we've got to be of the mindset that this is our space, collective space, and that passion has to come up. So when I wake up, I tell them, when I wake up in the morning, I want the people, whether it's China or whatever's on the other, Australia's on the other side of where I'm standing, I want them to know, oh, Khalfani's up again. So that's the how I want to wake up and stand and hit my feet. And maybe they don't hit my feet don't hit the floor like that every day, but I want them to hit the floor like that enough that we got some earthquake somewhere, because I'm doing what I got to do. I'm doing what the Creator and the ancestors prepared me to do. Right.
That's a powerful message, especially when you think about it in a communal way. If we all operate that way, when we Black people wake up, we want those who are coming for us to know we are up and to shiver from that realization, so that they cannot even dare think about coming to cause us any harm, right? I'm glad you mentioned integrity, and that was a great way to segue to it. After you explained it, it was a concept that I understood and a principle that I understood, but I had never heard someone talk about it that way. Integrity as a communal principle. Please break it down, because I do believe it's a great lesson that everyone should take with them today and implement.
Yeah. So let me just do that in the context of Bell, the last couple of things. So in addition to talking about your passion, Bell says you got to be willing to take risks, and you have to have courage to take those risks. And it's not about jumping in front of a bus. That's foolishness. That's not risk and courage. It's about having courage and taking risks to do things for your community, to change your position in space of where you are currently. Takes courage, and you got to take risks. You got to take risks to implement that courage. And then he says that you got to have humility, right? And you have to be humble in what you do, so that you can learn lessons in multiple places. So there's a great book about humility. It's called The Teachings of Ptahhotep. And the best version of that I like is the one that was edited by, or that was translated by, Asa Hilliard, The Teachings of Ptahhotep. And then the last piece, he says you got to have passion, take risks, have courage, and have humility. But he says that success is not individual, it's collective. So that if you understand that success is collective, then you really get it. And then when I thought back, after maybe 10 years after looking at the book and reading and teaching it, I went back and I really looked at the idea of integrity and how it related to the collective idea of success. And then it came to me that, you know what, that integrity is not individual. It's also collective, and it's collective in the sense of that you have accountability partners, and those accountability partners help you maintain your integrity, right? So it doesn't matter if it's your spouse, your friends, your children. And I got this lesson actually because I was thinking about something that when I was a teenager, and I was in junior high school, and everybody used to, not everybody, but a lot of people used to, maybe like take a little something from the corner liquor store as they were on their way home or something like that. And I decided one day, I was like, you know what, this is my time. I'm gonna get something too. I don't have no money, but I want a piece of candy or ice cream or something like that. And I used to go there and play video games and stuff like that. And when I did have a little money, I might buy something. But I was like, at this point, I didn't have any. And so I knew where the cameras were and this, that, and the other. And then I looked around and I was like, nobody's watching me. I was like, all right. And then just that last minute before I did it, my integrity partners, and my integrity partners in this case was my mother and my grandparents. I said, my mother's gonna make me come all the way back down here and probably with a belt in her hand, and make me pay for this in some form or fashion. And then I'm going, my grandfather was a sheriff, a deputy sheriff, and I was like, then they're all going to embarrass me, and they're going to be embarrassed, and so my integrity, the belt was an integrity partner, but in collectively, all of that they were my integrity partners, accountability partners. And so they helped me maintain my accountability to the precept of my integrity, right? So the integrity is like a precept, right? So that what do you do about certain things, and how do you maintain that? And so then if we understand that, then we can have other folks whom we rely on directly and or indirectly. So that was indirectly because they didn't know that they were my accountability partners. They knew what they had as expectations that they had taught me, but they weren't with me at that moment. And so then they helped me maintain that idea. And so we have to think about, in relationships, how do we maintain integrity? What does that mean, and how does it play itself out? Once again, none of these things are easy, and we have to navigate challenging spaces. And if we go back to the idea of community, and community being first, then we have lots of accountability partners all along the neighborhood. So you walking home, we knew that Miss So and So was going to call your mother before you got there, and say that, oh, I saw a Akil doing X, Y, and Z. And so, maybe not when I was growing up that the neighborhood person would spank you, but they definitely would call. And so then we knew that we wasn't going to do X, Y, and Z because that person was going to say something. Although we did have one person in the neighborhood, if you walk on their grass, they had some severe things that was going to happen if you walked on their grass. So she was an accountability partner on her own. All of those things, I think, play a role in it, and that in relationships, those are some of the spaces we have to navigate.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking now how Western culture teaches us that you are successful, you have built your wealth, you have built an empire, you, the individual, have earned your doctorate, right? And we go along with that. I earned my doctorate. I worked so hard for it. How can you tell me how to spend my money? I built it. No. You are who you are because of the community around you that made you who you are. And Dr. Khalfani is making this clear by breaking it down. And this, by the way, the whole conversation that we've been having is what Ubuntu is. He is literally breaking down Ubuntu. Because we get caught up in talking about words in this culture now, because Western culture, white folk, are very much about talking good talk and not living that good talk. And so you all get caught up, we all get caught up in, this is how we are, right? Democracy. But we know very well there's no country on the earth that is democratic. None, right? Because not every individual vote in the United States decides who becomes president. There's so much else that happens. So no country practices democracy, but here we are singing the song of democracy and identifying nations with it when they're not living by it. So I'm saying we can walk around talking about Ubuntu while not practicing Ubuntu. And what Dr. Khalfani is doing is helping you learn how to practice Ubuntu in your daily lives, in your family life, in your love relationships between two people life, where you understand, as Dr. Khalfani told us, that you as a woman, you are as a man, are not just responsible to that individual person. You're responsible to the community as well, because you exist because of the well-being of the community. Your well-being is guaranteed because of the well-being of the community. And a simple way to put this is, and I'm thinking now in the United States, right? Because we have a great audience in the United States, but also we have audience at home. But in the United States, and I hopefully the ones at home can take this lesson away from this example. In the hood, where we have a lot of crime, if we allow that neighborhood to continue in that way, right? And I see a lot when I'm traveling, and I'm glad you mentioned that. You know when you have gotten to the hood if you're on the bus. You know if you've gotten to a Black neighborhood that is not cared for when you're on the bus, because there's garbage everywhere. There's garbage everywhere, right? And if we go back to thinking, if I throw that garbage, it is a representation of my whole community. I'm destroying this whole community. My whole community is looked down upon. My whole community, the properties on my community are devalued, which is actually what happens, right? Then you will think twice before you throw that garbage. But we are all caught up in ourselves. "Ah, this is bothering me, so you just throw it. I don't care, so you just throw it." So I'm making these points for us to sit as Dr. Khalfani continues to break this down, to understand that the lessons that are being given is so that we can go implement them, so that we can go heal our community, so that we can detach. And it's funny because Dr. Khalfani, as I'm preparing again, as I'm writing to apply for my master's, I'm focusing on language, right? So I'm encountering Goge wa Thiong'o, and he talks about linguistic schizophrenic, which is focused on language, but very much applicable in what you're talking about today, where we speak Western languages and we go home and speak our languages, and we are a person operating not in themselves and therefore confused eternally. We have embraced this nuclear focused form of family. And especially for those of us who know communal, I am an individual who is fighting against myself because I understand what community is. But some of us are so detached from community that we believe this is a normal way, when we are actually operating, as Fela said, as zombies, because we're not being ourselves. So I'm happy that you broke down that integrity piece and showing that you cannot walk around talking about this is how much you've achieved, right? I am a good person, I do this, without acknowledging the people who held you accountable to be that person. So as we continue the conversation, let's talk about now. We've understood what the problem is. So now let's talk about who we are, who we were before the disruption, what our communal ways looked like, and how we can start implementing them today.
Yeah. So, in thinking about our what we do, I just think that, like I said, Sobonfu Some's book there's a bunch of books out there that we can read as resources that we need to utilize. And as you mentioned how Europeans are educating us, and I would say I wouldn't use that terminology. I would say how they are indoctrinating and miseducating us,
Thank
right?
you. Mm-hmm.
Because if we see what they're what we end up with as education, then we think we have an education, and what we have. I'm a contributor to a book called White Logic, White Methods, and what that book does, it won the Oliver Cromwell Cox Award in 2009. But the book endeavors to talk about that the ways that sociologists and social scientists use methodology is embedded in is uses Europeans methodology, and by using those methodologies, we're embedding white supremacy in the very methods of what we have. So Carter G. Woodson, back on the miseducation of the Negro, says that basically we need to get rid of, even go get your certification, your degrees and diplomas. However, you have to get rid of 50% or more of that stuff because it's so imbued with white supremacy and Eurocentric thinking and ideas that you can't implement the things that are beneficial to your community. So what you can use from that is systems, tools. Get the tools in there that are useful for you, and then I wrote this piece called The Sociology of Sociology. Then you have to do the analysis of the thing that you're using so that you then disaggregate the European imposition from the tool. Once you begin to do that, then you can use the tool as a tool, and see that you don't need to use the tool to cut your own people because that's what somebody else was doing, right? It's like, because we can think about it in that how Europeans took gunpowder that was used for festivities and used it for warfare, right? Not that everybody doesn't use it for that today, right? So it's used by lots of people for both of those things. Um, However, what they did was take something that was, beautiful in its origin. It was powerful and beautiful, but that's what it was used for mostly. And so then, how do we then now, uh, looking at our own self and our own systems and our own educational experiences? So I'm not saying don't get a degree, but I'm saying when you go get that degree, investigate what it is that you're learning and not learning in those spaces. What are the impositions on you? So I'll give you an example. I was at University of Pennsylvania, and that's where I got my doctorate, where Du Bois did the study of the Philadelphia Negro, right? And where Du Bois didn't get a full-time position. And however, this is now they laud Du Bois in a place like that. But in our classical sociological theory class, Du Bois wasn't taught at Penn, of all places, right? So, and he is if you look at him, he's the founding father of American sociology. And so then, does that mean that now when I teach, if I'm just teaching it the way that I learned it at Penn, do I now teach a theory in the way that I learned it? No, I have to disimbue myself of the white supremacist natures of that, and then reconfigure how I teach it so that it is both authentic and beneficial to my people. And so then the same is true with all of our other systems about relationships, and those are the tools we have to employ in determining how we move forward.
Hold on real quick. This is me running this whole thing by myself and wanting to respond to what you just said and responding to the audience. There we go. So which is possible, right? We continue the work even with that. As I get ready to go into my master's, and this is now to everyone who's continuing to go into these miseducation institutions, which is what their intention is. Their intention is to miseducate us and to have us serve them, right? And continue serving the false notion of white supremacy. We as Black people, if we're going to return, I'll detour. When we were starting, you said marriage is not easy. Nothing that we do should we expect to be easy, given the forces we are fighting, given the years of being detached from who we are that we've gone through. We should not expect anything as far as liberating ourselves to be easy. So let's start from there so that you have realistic expectations of what the work ahead of you is. So moving forward as a Mwana Ubuntu, as an African, when you sign up for school, whether it's kindergarten, whether it's master's, and kindergarten, this is parents guiding the child. Always take it and then come back with a sieve that is African-centered, right? Is what Khalfani is saying, and which I agree with. And many other ancestors before us and with us, and people with us today are teaching that you take what you're learning and then come back with an African lens and digest it. And then just like the digestive system, you take the things that are good for you, that are going to nourish you, and you excrete what is not good for you. Understanding that your knowledge is for service, is being acquired for service to community, not to build wealth, not to get money, not to get a good job. This is something I've been saying to my kids as I struggle to recenter them in our African ways. As they fight it, I say to them, okay, children, let's just stand on this. Whatever you go to do in school, just make sure it's in service of your community, right? I don't care about doctorates and PhDs and what acronyms that you have in front of you. As long as you're not serving your community, all those acronyms are useless. It doesn't matter that I'm sitting here talking to Dr. Khalfani, calling him Dr. Khalfani and giving him that honor, if Dr. Khalfani is not going to use the knowledge he earned to get that doctorate to serve his community. Is how we need to start thinking. And that's where the integrity comes in. And when you sit and think, oh, Nduku said this on Kumbukeni and I'm not doing it, that is Nduku being your accountability partner. Again, community, right? And we must, I am urging you, my people, we must return to that way of being. Our communal, because the evidence is laid before us that this Western way of thinking of nuclear family, of thinking of me as the individual, is showing that the results are not good. We have no we have food deserts, right? That's one of the things, because you're not worried about if I don't plant, there's not going to be food for my people. If I continue using the grocery store, there's not going to be food for my people. I can take the pepper that I bought today, take those seeds and do some grow bags and have some peppers, and I can share them with my neighbor. That's the way we need to start thinking, right? And therefore, in front of us is a broken down Black community globally. Like we have been destroyed because we have moved to thinking of ourselves as me and my wife, me and my children, instead of me, the parents who raised me, the parents who raised them, our neighbor next door, the children who are walking on the street, right? And everyone around us. Let me see. So how can we, and you said survival, and it's a big part of us not being able to move towards liberation, and it's intentionally done, where we have been put in a state of survival that we don't even focus on the things that we need to do. We cannot, because we are just desperately trying to survive. So how can we, as we are in this survival mode, intentionally return to these communal ways, Dr. Khalfani? How can we, and you gave an example before where you said you collect garbage on your street. You go from one end to the other collecting garbage. But what other ways can we do this? And think widely, think education, think politics, think law, think everything as you respond to this answer, please.
Yeah. So I want to preface it. One thing that you said is that they destroyed. I would say I wouldn't use that refrain. I would say that they endeavored to, but that we're having this conversation is indicative that they haven't destroyed. They have muted maybe, but not destroyed. They've disguised. They've they mask it in, like we have some, like, rap music and other music is beautiful music. However, they try to wrap it in that the things that are negative, right? So then all the things that they try to promote and they will spend money on, that their first and foremost endeavor is psychological warfare. Even the military itself, that psyops is one of the first entities that goes into a field, what they would say a field, when they're in warfare, right? They want to take over the radio waves, they want to take over the television thing, they want to take over the internet, and they want to they used to go and drop leaflets and create confusion, and so then that kind of confusion is part and parcel of what their endeavors are. So, and some people will try to say that they've brainwashed us. Well, no, they haven't brainwashed us. Washing, even using that term, means that we haven't studied them, because washing means to clean. So they've brain dirtied us and not brainwashed, right? We need a good washing, but we've been brain dirtied. Or some people may say we need a rogation, right? If you go back to African spiritual systems, and that rogation, we need a collective rogation to get out the brain dirtying and the confusion that we've acquired from the centuries of torment and control. And that's not just been in the United States. That's been across the continent in almost every country. Even some of it you see in Ethiopia, where that wasn't colonized, but the Italians were around, and so you got you can go get you some good pasta in Italy. Well, I mean in Ethiopia, but why? Because they have brain dirtied us in those spaces as well. And so when we think about the question you asked, one of the things that we've done over the years is that I really think that we shouldn't go to these public schools because they are brain dirty institutions. That they, in fact, not all of them, but many of them are about confusion, are a place where they even talk about that they can predict the prison size of the population from the third grade, right? So if they're saying these things, that tells you that there's some other agenda. And we, in sociology, we talk about hidden agendas, or hidden curriculums. What is the hidden agenda, hidden curriculum that is actually that is there and alive that we're not studying? What is it that's really going on Why is it that there's this push all of a sudden to have free pre-K? I don't know if that's a good idea, right? So then the push here is that we should be developing our own African-centered educational institutions, and that's from pre-K to college. Unfortunately, many of our colleges and universities that are HBCUs still are not doing the things. There's some people there who do things that are African-centered, but the institutions themselves tend not to be African-centered. And so then how do we create that? Is that we have to fund those institutions to be Pan-Africanist, to be African-centered, to be welcoming of the things that we want to be welcomed in those places and spaces. And this is definitely true on the continent and the islands, that in those places, they're even more Eurocentric than they are here. You don't have a Malefe Asante at most of the, you should have a Malefe Asante at every university in Africa, right? You should have, just like here, they teach English, and English class is not about English, it's about writing. Well, we should have, and history class is mostly about American history when you take history, but they don't even have to say American. So when you take history in Africa, it should be about African history. It shouldn't even have to say African history. And we haven't gotten to those places and spaces that we need to rethink, reconceptualize our pedagogy. We need to we need to Africanize, not even re-Africanize. We need to Africanize our ways of doing and thinking from an educational perspective that places African people in the center. If you're in school in Kenya and Uganda, Tanzania, you can't tell me that you don't know about the history of Ghana and Mali and Songhai, about the San and the Khoi. You can tell me more about what's going on with the king and queen in England than you can about your neighbor, brother, and sister. You don't know about all. We should have, everybody on the continent should be able to tell you all 54 countries. Every student should be able to tell you. That should be one of the required lessons for us. And they should know the history of Africans in the diaspora, not from a European perspective, but from a Malefe Asante, from a Tukufu Zuberi, from a Akil Kokayi Khalfani, from all these folks that they're learning. They need to learn about the African experience from those who are Pan-Africanist and African-centered, because that's going to give them a different space and place of learning. If you had more people learning about African Americans, if you want to use that refrain, Africans in America, from the perspective of those who are African-centered, you could rest assured that in 10 years, the folks coming here to the Americas would have a different perception when they get here. They wouldn't expect everybody to be in gangs or everybody to be a millionaire. When I lived in South Africa, some brother said to me, says, "Oh, all y'all got limousines." I'm like, "What are you talking about, bro?" The majority of and nowhere near a limousine. But that perception creates this reality that they've seen on TV, and that's how folks begin to think, because that's the image that Europeans have created and project out, because they control the media outlets that we need to think about. And so then once we begin to see that, we can begin to recontextualize our brains and thinking and understanding. So one of the things that we did, I worked on school systems for years now, for decades. So there was a homeschool not a homeschool. There was a Saturday class program that we used to have that was called Children of the Sun, and we'd have every Saturday. We would have children who would come to these programs, and we would tell them about their African history and culture. And it was a beautiful thing. Went for quite a few years. I don't remember exactly how long, but then that kind of faded out, and some other things came up. And then I was working with a sister on an independent school, and that didn't really play out. And then I was the president of an African-centered charter school. And whenever there's an African-centered charter school, the state and its agents, and some of their agents look like us, begin to do things to unravel them. So then there was somebody who was basically I'm trying to use my words wisely here, that this person worked with the state to unravel the institution, and it unraveled not just the school, but all the institutions related to it. And so then those kinds of folks who worked as agents like that are agent provocateurs, are folks who are doing things to bring about the demise of our community, and they couch it sometimes in that they're doing it, or they're doing it the right way, or they have something else. But in the end, if you were doing that and you didn't like how somebody was doing something, then you move and go on about your business and build something else, as opposed to striving to unravel the thing that's bringing some resources and benefit to the community. And the last thing we did was we had a homeschool co-op, and for about 3 or 4 years, it was a group of us who are in the Essex County area for the most part. But we had one of the brothers had owned a building in Newark, and we brought our children there and we homeschooled them in a very African-centered way for 3 or 4 years. And so that worked for a while, and and I'm doing that, and I was teaching a morning class there, and then I had to go run and teach my classes at the college, and it just became unsustainable because we don't have enough infrastructure and people to make those things happen. But the ideas behind those were very African-centered, and providing space for our children and youth to think and see the world differently. And so those are some of the other kinds of things. And maybe it wasn't, maybe the children didn't think it was the best model because there wasn't a lot of kids there. And so therefore, for them, maybe there wasn't a lot of young folks in their age group. And so that was maybe isolating for them a little, to a certain extent. And I think we need to think about those things and figure out other ways, more productive ways to do so. And there's a bunch of homeschooling groups out there now, some still here in Essex County and others that are national. So there's some national online schools. Ngolo has one. Is based out of you were on a call with them the other day there, but they're based out of Atlanta, and they have a homeschool. They have an online. I think it's K through 12, and doing some beautiful African-centered work. So those, maybe at some point they could open up to folks on the continent, and you could have another building on that kind of a foundation that could create a different reality for folks.
I think that's actually what they're doing. They are working on a couple of schools on the continent to operate from there. So as you talk about the rites of passage, as we wrap up, the rites of passage, because it's part of the solution. So you talked about education and how we should be educating and move away from the miseducation institutions and build our own, which requires funding, right? Which requires also, because I was getting ready to say, let's support Dr. Uma. I'm sorry, people. I'm not saying this to criticize Dr. Uma. I'm just saying this to continue stressing the point of communal, right? I applaud Dr. Uma in what he's doing, but that project would be much easier if he comes together with others and builds as a community, as a co-op, not just a school that he started. So I would like him to move away from that mentality of, I have built a school, to we have built a school, especially because he is asking for the community to help him fund it. So this is not a Dr. Uma school. This is a Black people school. Black people helped build it. So, and it's interesting because we recently were at an event, and I'll come back to rites of passage. We recently were at an event where he was the guest speaker. And after he was done speaking, some people voiced what they're doing. And a young man spoke about how he too wants to start a school. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, you have to give grace and you could be quiet. But I'm thinking, instead of you saying you want to start a school as a young man, go speak to Dr. Uma and see how the two of you can work to expand the school he's starting and then start another one. Like, we have to start thinking in community because it makes it easier. Dr. Uma would not have taken as long as he has to have the school go up if he was building it with community and talking about it as community built, not just my thing. Because what Black people will do in this new way they're socialized is be like, if that's your school, I don't have to help it, right? Because you're making it so much about you and not the community. Rites of passage. How do we go about it, and why is it important for us to return to the rites of passage?
Yeah, so even in here in New Jersey, there's several, and in New York, across the country, there's several powerful rites of passage programs, and I think that and obviously on the continent, especially in the traditional sense, there are rites programs, age, becoming a man, becoming a woman, experiences, and I think that the part of that is that you learn fellowship, right? And that because most of those are cohort based things, and so then your cohorts are the ones that work with you and grow with you, and your age mates are the ones that um, hold your feet to the fire, hopefully when need to be, back to accountability, right? And so then I think that those are some of the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of what we're looking for. And there's there's quite a few books out there on these things in terms of developing them, and I think both on the continent and then diaspora broadly, in the islands and South and Central America and in the U.S., that we don't just need rites of passage for children. We need rites of passage at different levels because many of us haven't been exposed to them at all. So therefore, how do you know what it means? This actually is helpful in thinking about the idea of um, rites of passage for folks moving into marriage. How do you know to be a good husband or a good wife if you haven't seen that, right? And so many of our young people in the U.S. and on the continent, the marriage numbers are dropping all around precipitously. And so then if people don't know what it means to be a good wife or a good mother, then you need rites of passage maybe to help you to figure out what that means. The same is true for our elders. Some of them are what we would call olders. They've gotten older, but they don't have wisdom of an elder, and so they need eldership. And so then they could use that as well. And so I'm a member of the National Black Council of Elders, and there are some discussions about rites of passage in that group, and they have definitely tools that they have, and I think we should be thinking about those kinds of tools at each level, so that something at as you're going through puberty, something when you get a little bit older, and something when you're going into eldership, and then something specifically for marriage. That's outside of marriage counseling, but maybe it is a part of it. My wife and I had this we did a wedding performed a wedding for someone not too long ago, and I think that what I've told the couple, we told them, is that we're here to be someone they can lean on when they need someone, if they have questions or concerns about things, that we can be integrity partners, or we can be uh, somebody who to bounce things off of. And so then and then so we did the whole formal ceremony for them and everything, and then that became something that helped them to do whatever else they needed. And I just think we also need to incorporate other things into it. So we need to have libations, we need to have into all of our stuff. So what you're asking about in terms of the young folks, so we have Kwanzaa and stuff. So my children, we push them to do libations. We bring them into the spiritual centers as much as possible. And so then they become the ones who are going to be the ones to take over and doing those things. Some of them kicking and screaming sometimes, but nonetheless, if we don't expose them to it, all they see is a westernized way of thinking about it. And all they know is either Christianity or Islam, when we have a wealth of pantheon of other kinds of spiritual systems that have been long part of African spirituality. And I'm reading a book now by Katrina Hazard on hoodoo, and it's really interesting to look at that hoodoo and conjure as two completely different spiritual systems that existed here in the United States, that most of us only see it through the eyes of Hollywood, and we think that it's some kind of negative form of voodoo because it's not has nothing to do with that, even though that's how Hollywood has portrayed it. But there's other kinds of stuff that have been that are part of that history, and how that even when it was at its height, that Europeans and Indians from India tried to exploit it and bastardize it, and so that every element we have to look at how have others taken the things that we have brought to the table and corrupted them and presented the corruption as the legitimacy, right? So that's the thing that we have. We have, even with our African spiritual systems and the teachings of Yoruba and other things, there's Europeans in the US who are and other places who are the teachers of it now, and our Babalaos and Olarisha priests, and they're the ones who are presenting themselves as the authorities. And so, another whole conversation might be on spirituality and what does that mean for us as a people. That's why I organize the African Spirituality Conference every year, so that we can begin to start thinking about what does spirituality look like, what has it looked like, what could it look like, right? And I'm a part of another group that looks at Afrofuturisms. I don't like the word Afro. I would say Afri. There's no O in Africa. But Afrofuturism, and how does the future look for us as African people? And what might we be doing today that is innovative and invention based and thought? What is our future? What does it look like to think like an African in the future? What does AI look like from an African perspective, and something beyond AI that African people are bringing to the table? We've got to go back to think and understand that we are the progenitors of invention. One of the oldest inventions in the world that we bring to the table is writing and math. If you think about it, we oftentimes go to ancient Kemet. However, if we really want to be true about it, we have to go to the San, right? San rock art is something that has existed and told the stories of the San people for 30,000 years, maybe. And so if we think about that and we say, well, that's primitive. Well, maybe you see it today that way, but actually it was advanced technology. Tell me one thing that you could write with today on a wall that's not in an air-conditioned setting that's going to last 1,000 years. Is your marker going to do that? Are the pens that you're going to use do that? No, they had a technology, hear me, a technology that exists for tens of thousands of years, and we don't have anything comparable today because we think that what they did was primitive, and we didn't think that it was Afrofuturism. That was Afrofuturism in the day. And so what is it today that we're going to do that's going to last for Africans and people around the world to see in 1,000 years, to say that the African people in New Jersey, the African people in the US and Brazil and around the world did this, and this is what they brought to the table 1,000 years later? What are our pyramids today?
And just for, as Dr. Khalfani talks about the work that they've done with their children, I am witness to it because I recently encountered one of his children, and they are very much African grounded. So that is good work. I wanted to say, because again, we are operating as community. The question I asked you has resulted to, because I took it as a question for myself as well, and for us all, to me, being pushed to answer this aspect of rites of passage and education spaces. So there's a big movement, and now we're talking about Western culture and it coming, infecting us, is what I say, right? There's a big, and excuse me, because this is a taboo topic, Dr. Khalfani, so excuse me, but I must address it because it's important as we continue to heal that we do it in the right way. There's a big push on LGBTQ rights, right? And we all are scared to address how those practices, LGBTQ way of being, can be harmful in our community. We're all scared to address that, but we must address it. Fear cannot allow us not to make sure that as we return to our way of being and as we heal, we're not addressing certain things that could be harmful. You cannot, while working on rites of passage, not representing yourself as a man, yet you're teaching male children to be a man. You cannot do that. You cannot be a person who identifies as trans or as a woman while you're appearing as a man and you're running a rites of passage program. Cannot. Because you do not have the tools that are required to teach those male children to be in an African male way. So I'm just going to say it that way. And I hope you all take the lesson there. And we must talk about these things, because if we do not, the work that we'll put, which as Khalfani showed you, he has to run here and do this, run there and do that. And sometimes some programs are given up because there's not enough people doing it. If we do it the wrong way, we will have spent a lot of time wasted, right? We will have to return here and say, our community is not healed yet. We have introduced these bad practices and we need to restart. As we realize how much time has been spent in detaching us from who we are and the work that needs to be done, and that there are few people doing it, we must do it right. So you cannot be LGBTQ and run a family program that is grounded in growing generations, that is grounded in male and female ways of relating. Let's just place it that way. I don't know if you wanted to say something as we wrap up, Dr. Khalfani.
Well, building on what you just said, I also think that we have a challenge sometimes that people who are advising people about relationships is that they're not in relationships.
That too.
And it doesn't mean that they don't have knowledge. And so I'm not striving to belittle their knowledge. The challenge is that if you're not experientially in marriage, dealing with and navigating the space through it, that it's hard to be the one. I want to say it's hard. It's problematic to be the one that's.
You don't have the tools. You don't have
you
the
may have
tools.
been married before, right? So when I first got divorced, I said, well, I'm never talking about marriage again because I was a failure at it. And so as I thought about that, I actually began to think that, well, there's a lot of important lessons that I learned in the process, though. And so then there's certain things I could have been able to say before I got remarried. And I think that now being married, though, that there's even more that I have to contribute because I've been down that road twice and I'm still still married. And so that gives me a different set of tools than someone who has either never been married or married for a brief time and got divorced or separated and is now presenting themselves as the proprietor of knowledge about marriage. And so then I think I see some of that, and I see the problematic of it, and I think that those are the types of things we need to think about as well. And I just go back to also to the fact that, sometimes some of those folks are African centered, but I go back to the fact that the ultimate part of being African centered is that you have to be in that space. You have to be continuously in that space. And I've been in that space for decades. And so I'm not striving to advise something that's outside of my intellectual foundation and my experiential foundation. And I'm still learning, right, on all of those fronts. And I think that part of it, what all of us have to do is continue to be learners and to be open. And I have two last things I wanted to say. One is one of the lessons I learned years ago in a men's group actually was I was the first time I actually experienced freedom, right? And that was that I was silent in the group until somebody came to me and it was my turn to say something. But I made an intention of not speaking, of not, I'm a scholar, so that we taught to be ready, prepared, to think about and analyze and give feedback. I didn't I wasn't listening to give any feedback. I wasn't listening to respond to or to build on. I simply was there to be in the experience and in essence of what the brothers had to offer. And to me, I freed myself in that process. And I was able to hear and experience what they were saying in a different way than if I had been in the kind of typical academician mode of being in that space. And so then I would say, give yourself the grace to be silent and be to find freedom in that regard. I think that that's a tool that we could use more often, because then you really hear what folks are saying in those spaces. Not easy. It's really not easy, right? Because it's antithetical to what we think we should be doing. But it is a powerful space and place to be in. And the last piece was actually to you, and I think one of my students might have mentioned this to you the other day, but I want to reiterate it here for people in this space, and that is that as you're preparing for your doctorate, right, that I think we have a missed way in which we approach it, and that is that if you're applying for a terminal degree, that uh, you don't have to have a master's to apply for a terminal degree, right? You get your master's along the way. So then, when I got my doctorate from Penn, I had a bachelor's. I had all the sociology courses beforehand. So you may need to get some courses, but you don't have to spend the time, energy, and money getting a master's if your objective is to get a terminal degree, is to get a doctorate in a specific area. And I always, a lot of people now are kind of pushing towards getting educational EDDs, educational doctors, but I say get a doctorate in a specific area. And if you want some educational curriculum things that you can do that, but there's so many other places that you can utilize a doctorate that is outside of the context of just an EDD. I won't say just an EDD because it's a lot of work for people. So getting an EDD, that there's other kinds of ways that you can do it. But I would say apply to top schools and you do the kind of prerequisite courses that you're doing for the field that you're interested in. But if you're applying to top schools, they're mostly going to pay for you to go there, and you're not going to need to get a master's beforehand, because you get the master's in your doctorate program. That's what a terminal PhD for the most part is. And I wasn't the only one that was there at an Ivy League institution getting a doctorate without having a master's first.
Thank you for that, because that was a time-saving and money-saving advice that you gave me. So, yes. So I usually thank you so much, first of all, for being with us and for sharing all the lessons. But I'm also going to address something in the chat that was said. I usually move away from, and it's wise to move away from these type of comments. But given the lesson we are trying to teach today, and the harm that these other counters have on us, it's necessary that I address this. So the person says, sorry, but who says Africa never had same-sex individuals? Africans are not exclusive. We're just like any other group of people. I know African gay men who look after their extended families. And then they go on to say, the African family is based on taking care of all, not excluding any, not the Eurocentric husband, wife, children. You are pushing the Eurocentric family model. So that's not the point, right? And we are not talking about excluding people who identify as LGBTQ. We're talking about logic. We're talking about procreation. We're talking about having the male figures in community who need to imbue and teach those male and manly lessons to our young boys. And then the females who need to teach those feminine lessons to why? For the sake of the well-being, for the sake of maintaining our community and the well-being of the community, for the sake of growing generations, right? We do not want to be a people who go extinct. We do not want to be a people who go extinct, and therefore, or you don't want to be the last 10 Black people surviving on Earth because we took a model that does not result in having children. That's the goal. It's not to exclude anyone. It's not to shun anyone. It's to say that if you're in any program that is looking at how are we going to grow generations, how are we going to prepare those generations for those roles in the community that are required to grow generations, then you must be someone who identifies as such. and not otherwise. That doesn't mean that we will not, as a community, care and include those who identify otherwise. All right. Asante, Dr. Khalfani. Have a good Sunday. It is a pleasure having you in community with us all now and moving forward, because now you're part of us, and we look forward to the many other lessons that you'll teach. Even if it is me having conversation and then coming back and sharing what you've taught me, right? Not necessarily as a guest, because that's another way we don't think about accountability and community. You're having a conversation with someone, you learn something, you bring it and share it with the larger community for the well-being of our community. Siku njema, kwaherini, kila laheri.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here, and feel free to call on me anytime.
Yes, definitely. Hi.